Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Anthony Wade. It is April 29th, 2025. And tonight's episode is piggybacking off yesterday's, which was when the Elder Accountability Team that basically exonerated Dr. Brown and suggested that he should be immediately returned to ministry. And one of their recommendations was for Dr. Brown's wife, Nancy, to make a public statement, so she is obliged. Let me start by saying it makes me sad to have to watch the spouses of fallen leaders who never did anything necessarily sinful in that situation have to prostrate themselves, and basically stand up for their man. I get it. And listen, she was around back then, but she wasn't, intimately involved, let's say, in some of the nitty gritty, dirty details. So a lot of her perspective is probably strictly from what her husband has told her over the years and at that time. I will try to proceed gently because this is certainly not Nancy Brown's fault. But she has now entered the public fray to basically defend Dr. Brown. And I understand why. I mean, she's his wife of 50 years, and she's his partner in everything. And Dr. Brown stands to lose a lot of pull, a lot of money, a lot of stature, and basically, be forced to, fade into the woodwork, if you will. And obviously, the charismaniacal machine has no intention of allowing that to happen. So, as I predicted, we're starting to see the wolves come out to basically demand that he be returned to ministry. It starts with this bogus, accountability team that completely dismisses portions of the Firefly Report, completely dismisses their summation of sexual abuse, and instead changes it to like leadership abuse or something like that. Whatever. Look, I just got into it a little bit with Shane Eidelman on his page because, he had posted this. That's where I found this statement, which he had actually reposted from Jeremiah Johnson's page. So it's like the 7 degrees of separation of heresy there is pretty strong. I tried to reason with Pastor Eidelman, and essentially this statement is calling the victims liars. There's no other way to frame it. That's what it is. It's just going to be another thing that's going to be used by the Stephen Strang Charisma News masses to, gloss over this, just spit in the face of the victims, one of which is dead. Nothing to do with Dr. Brown, to be clear. She just passed away a few years back. And, but, when one looks at the story that's being told, Dr. Brown essentially doesn't disagree with anything. He just frames it differently. He admits that he was idiotic, for example, with the 19-year-old girl, but insists on this fairy tale that it was just a father-daughter thing, even though there is multiple witnesses that say he was kissing her on the mouth, he was patting her on the butt. These are all typical grooming type activities. By the way, Dr. Brown did not need to be consciously at that time thinking he was grooming in order for this to still be grooming. And so, Nancy's opinion here is irrelevant. Unless, of course, you discount what Sarah says, unless you think she's lying, and for what reason she would lie. The only person here who has anything to gain from being, not truthful is Dr. Brown. He's the one who has everything to lose. The husband, who agrees that he met with Dr. Brown and Nancy and his wife, and they agreed together to basically keep it silent, even though Dr. Brown, as the ministry leader, had the responsibility to lead and say, no, I need to own up. By the way, he could have owned up to what he did without revealing who the other person was. So let's drop this facade that, like, oh, he was gung ho and really wanted to go out and tell everybody. But, out of respect for the woman, he decided, okay, no problem. I'll keep it hush hush, please. He still could have come clean about what he did without mentioning who he did it with. Anyway, the husband, though, said that, he was more than willing to basically, like, let it go. He did so for 20 years, even after his wife passed away. But he said that Dr. Brown's denials and basically trying to frame this as if it was his wife's fault forced him to come out and tell the truth. And what he said was that Dr. Brown was not willing to discuss this, that he said it was like pulling teeth with him. We also know that Dr. Brown essentially told this woman to stop having sex with her husband. And at the same time, her husband basically accused Dr. Brown to his face of having phone sex with his wife. And also that Dr. Brown tried to meet with her twice, and she denied it. She stopped it, just like Sarah stopped it. So you could sit there and it's like everybody wants to bend over backwards to give Dr. Brown credit for everything when he doesn't deserve credit for it. Just because the two women in question did not, give in, isn't credited to Dr. Brown's column. I'm sorry, it's just not. And again, don't confuse the issues like the accountability team did. This is not about forgiveness. We all pray that Dr. Brown is truly repentant and truly forgiven and restored to his walk with Christ, not his job. That's the sleight of hand that many people are playing. So without further ado, it's a written statement, so bear with me. In view of all that has transpired recently, and also in light of the newly released Firefly report, I felt compelled to make a statement. I wanted to do this for months, but have been constrained by others. I am now free to speak the truth to all those who are willing to hear. For the record, I am an extremely private person. Endeavoring to make this very public statement is truly beyond what I'm comfortable with. Again, I feel bad for her. No one has asked me to make it, but for the sake of truth and honesty, I feel I must. For those who know me, I am a no-nonsense person who tells it like it is. Irrelevant. Truth and justice are very important to me. Irrelevant. And suffice to say, I am not one of those wives you'll find sitting at her husband's feet, looking up adoringly at him, thinking he do no wrong. I am and have always been Mike's worst critic. I know who he is inside now. We've been married 50 years. Throughout our marriage, I've spoken plainly and openly about his shortcomings and faults to him, as well as to others. In recent days, Mike has been accused of some of the most vile things, and the way he has been portrayed on social media is absolutely sickening, to put it mildly. Listen, he's being portrayed based upon the things that he has said, he has admitted, and then the multiple witnesses, the two victims, right, plus the multiple witnesses that corroborate most of their story. So, no offense, Nancy, but spare me your pearl clutching, okay? What's absolutely sickening is everybody trying to rush to defend what is clearly unbiblical and indefensible. She says it's a complete fantasy. Now, it's interesting because Dr. Brown had written down his fantasies about the wife in the note that Sarah had found, but I digress. Add to that the accusations of hiding sin and attempting to keep things concealed. Those are not accusations. Those are facts. He clearly buried these stories 25 years ago, tried to bury them when they came back up in 2020, tried to bury them again in 2024. He sent out a fundraising email as soon as the story broke, claiming that his ministry was being attacked by Satan. So again, these are not mere accusations of trying to keep things concealed. She says nothing can be further from the truth. He is an open book and transparent to a fault. Spare me. He has not been transparent about this whatsoever. He has tried his best to doctor it up to, I just had an emotional soul tie. No, you had phone sex with a woman. I'm sorry if that's, too blunt, but, what you've seen in the accountability report is this attempt to sugarcoat things, to gloss over, to use specific language like, oh, well, we disagree with Firefly's use of the word sexual abuse, so we're just going to say leadership abuse. Things are what they are. And the facts remain that this husband has credibly accused Dr. Brown of having phone sex with his wife, telling his wife to stop having sex with him, and trying to basically consummate that into a physical affair by trying to meet with her twice. These facts are not in dispute. He has always been one to be quick and admit wrong. Really, really. Dr. Brown is quick to admit wrong. Have you witnessed any of his public ministry, Nancy? I mean, he doesn't admit anything. His entire, ecosystem is a hermetically sealed heretical bubble of people who basically are sycophants and worship the ground he walks on. And if you dare say anything in opposition, you are exercised out. You are considered divisive, and no other opinions other than positive assent is allowed in. So he's not transparent to a fault, and always quick to admit when wrong, and ask forgiveness. And by the way, I believe that he did ask for forgiveness in this case. That doesn't change what he did. Even during events of almost 24 years ago, I must state here categorically, in no uncertain terms, Mike is not and has never been a sexual predator, groomer, or deviant, nor has he ever exploited a single human being for his own personal gain or ego, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Really? See, how do you know that? Because he told you? Then what do you say to the husband of the dead woman? Because you met with them years ago, right? Before you met together and agreed that to not embarrass anybody, that you would keep silent about it. But what was said at that meeting, Nancy? Don't give me the emotional soul tie garbage. What was said that was done between Dr. Brown in a position of spiritual authority and this sheep? What was done? You're saying that it was not exploitative to tell her to stop having sex with her husband? Are you telling me it was not exploitative to try to meet up with her? It was not exploitative to have phone sex with the woman when he was married and she was married to other people? Because that sure seems to me to be physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So she says this is a fantasy. It doesn't sound like a fantasy, Nancy. It sounds like denial. He's never attempted to overpower or manipulate any female or force himself on them for sexual, emotional, physical gratification, nor has he used them to stroke his ego or get something from them, never in capital letters. Okay, so let's deal with this. I don't think anybody's making the charge that he was overpowering anybody. The married woman was of the same age group as him. And for what it looks like, she was a willing participant. But the point that Nancy and everybody keeps leaving out is what the power dynamic was. Because Dr. Brown was in a position of spiritual authority, and he abused that authority. Doesn't matter if she was a willing participant. I mean, it matters for her and her husband, obviously, but it doesn't matter for what the deal is here. That is a manipulation. When you're in the position of spiritual authority and you end up in a inappropriate sexual relationship, albeit over the phone, with one of your sheep, that is manipulation. As Mike has previously stated, during the immediate aftermath of the split of Brownsville, which is an extremely dark time, no offense, Nancy, but not really relevant. Please don't use that as the excuse. The pressures on all sides were almost insurmountable. Spiritual, emotional, financial. In fact, we lost our home and actually went bankrupt due to the effects of the split. That sounds horrible, but it also has no relevance to this situation. So what do you say? That because you just spent 2 paragraphs telling us how he's never done anything wrong in his life, and now you're providing context for why he may have done something wrong. The responsibility on his shoulders at the time was a burden, almost unbearable weight. He carried and still carries such a deep, deep love and sense of responsibility for all the students as well as the staff and faculty who were part of the fire, BRSM and fire years ago. Yeah, which is it? Is he completely pure and clean and never done anything wrong? Or was he just really stressed because of everything that was going on and the enormous weight on his shoulders? Because you really can't have it both ways. There were times when I sat alone and watched him weep because of the weight of that burden, and he expressed to me many times he was unable and ill-equipped to carry it and could not carry it. So, again, did he carry it or did he not carry it? Because you're telling both sides of the story. It was during that very short period of time he formed an emotional tie with another person. You mean the phone sex with the other woman, right? Not an emotional tie, right? The wife of a couple we were extremely close friends with. I may be wrong. By all means, somebody correct me in the comments if I am, but I believe that Dr. Brown was considered to them their spiritual authority in some level. So I'm sure they consider themselves friends. I'm not saying that, but don't change the story to avoid the power dynamic at work. And to reiterate here, this was not a physical relationship, but an emotional tie, but sin nonetheless. It was not a physical relationship. I don't know about that. Phone sex to me seems to be potentially physical. But more importantly, the only reason why it didn't rise to physical activity is because the woman refused to meet with him. And to state things very clearly and plainly, he did not get caught, but came of his own accord to confess everything to a close friend and leader at Fire, and then to myself, going over all the details of everything that transpired. Yeah, then you're calling the husband a liar. That's what you're doing. Because he says he had to confront Dr. Brown. He then said that it was like pulling teeth to get him to admit to anything until he finally admitted that what him and his wife were engaging, him and the husband's wife, were engaging in was sexual in nature. So again, we want to create this fairy tale where, Dr. Brown was just like trying to do the right thing. And, it's just a little oopsie, except in order for that to be true, everybody else has to be lying. And it's not just the two victims. It's all the surrounding folks from Fire, right? There's other witnesses to what's going on. He had to come clean and be the one to initiate confession for his own conscience sake, and this he did. And by the way, he may have done that with Nancy. I have no idea. That's not really relevant to the conversation because he absolutely did not do it with this woman or the husband. The husband had to confront him, unless, of course, the husband's lying. And I'm sorry, I understand that there's many in the charismaniacal world who so desperately want to get Dr. Brown back into the machine working that they're willing to sit there and give him the benefit of doubt for everything, and the victims all get smeared. And the bottom line is when you consider the scope of everything and the fact that Dr. Brown keeps kind of dancing around, I did this, but I didn't do that, and I did this, but it seems to me it's pretty transparent who is probably not being completely forthcoming, because the husband has nothing to gain whatsoever. And remember, we are not talking here of physical adultery or years of struggle, but an extremely short period of time when he was going through the most painful, pressure-filled time of his life. Well, again, which is it, Nancy? Is it that he is pristine and didn't do anything? Or, oh my God, he was under so much stress at the time that he just had to have phone sex with another man's wife? And the physical adultery, again, did not become physical adultery because the woman refused to meet. But he tried. At least that's the story. This is not to make any kind of excuse, really, because it sure sounds like it. As each one of us is enticed by our own evil desires, James 1:14, but it is simply to give background as to what transpired. To now hear that he's being accused of never truly repenting, in addition to the accusations of him manipulating and using his position in abhorrent and diabolical ways, is stunning. I have no words. Well, I do. I don't know if anybody's accused him of not truly repenting. I mean, I think that's, between him and God, I guess. I don't believe I've ever said, because I have no way of knowing. And by the way, the Firefly report says that nothing seems to have happened since 2002. So whatever did happen, he must have apparently dealt with it on some level. I'm sure he dealt with it with Nancy, and give her credit for forgiving him and keeping the marriage intact and moving on, because that's what we're supposed to do. But again, that doesn't really change what happened. And, he makes claims that he had a Matthew 18, which is a completely wrong way to look at that verse, meeting with Sarah, the younger girl. But Sarah's insistence is that never happened, that the only meeting they had was to talk about the married woman because she had found apparently some kind of a notes that he had made that included fantasies he was having about this married woman, and just left it around for Sarah to find while she was house sitting. Once again, kind of a typical grooming activity. Not to get too graphic, but for the weeks that followed his confession, I watched a man writhe on the floor in agonizing repentance. I don't know what to do with that. He was devastated by his own failure before me. Sure he was. Before others, I'm sure he was. And before God, I'm sure he was. What do we do with that kind of repentance? Smite the person? Punish them? Humiliate them? Or abandon them? No, you forgive them, Nancy, and you get all the credit in the world for that. That does not mean, however, that he goes back into ministry. Because he wouldn't have the ministry he has if he had been honest and forthcoming back then. That's the point. She says, do we broadcast their sin to the entire world? Yes. Yes. Not, by the way, if he was just a congregant in a church who had sinned. And even in those cases, the Bible does talk about the excommunication of somebody out of, I think, the Corinthian church. That was public. But the main crux here is that Dr. Brown enjoys a public ministry. Therefore, this should have been broadcast, maybe not to the entire world. I mean, I'm not suggesting he has to take out a full page ad, but at the very least, he should have come clean. I don't know if he had a board back then or he had people that were overseers, but to the school, to the students, especially to the people that he basically, sinned against. Yeah, he's supposed to come clean, but he didn't. Instead, he used Matthew 18 to have these kind of bull sessions with the victims and make it, and where I'm sure that he was genuinely apologetic, because we all are when we get caught. She says, or do we treat them the way the Lord has treated us? This is where the sleight of hand comes in. No one is suggesting that Dr. Brown was beyond forgiveness. No one is suggesting that if he's truly repentant, he's beyond the restoration to the body of Christ. What we're saying is he's disqualified from ministry. There's a big, big difference between the two. And Dr. Brown knows this because he certainly is biblically smart. He knows the Bible. He knows the qualifications for leadership in the church. And he knows he no longer fits them. He is open to the charge of debauchery. You can make the argument that he is not the husband of one wife. The bottom line is, it's time to not continue to spit on the victims for the sake of trying to get him back into his job. These are very real questions I personally have to face and come to grips with. I will say that forgiveness is a process and we don't get there overnight. I'm sure we don't. But as we look to God, we get a glimpse of the beauty of his character. We begin to see and understand his nature and the essence of who he is and his overwhelming goodness, which is what he showed Moses when Moses asked God to show him his glory. Not sure where she's going with that. It was the Lord's goodness he chose to reveal. And forgiveness and redemption are a major part of the essence of God's goodness. Yes, they are. But it has nothing to do with him returning to his job. Again, nobody is making the argument that Dr. Brown should not be forgiven and that he is somehow irredeemable. I would never make that argument. Redemption, however, is not the restoration to ministry. It's the very foundation of the gospel we preach. To be clear, God does not wink at sin. I'm sorry, but it sure seems like you are. And we must be careful to walk a fine line as we deal with sin, forgiveness, and restoration. Again, forgiveness, restoration, absolutely, but not restoration to ministry. God is infinitely gracious and so forgiving that it's sometimes difficult to accept it, and many times we don't even like the idea that God is so gracious it goes against our very idea of human justice. I mean, yeah, in extreme cases, but I don't think Dr. Brown fits in those cases. I think he made some very poor judgments and mistakes at a time when he was preaching holiness and telling his female students what kind of panties they were allowed to wear, he was having phone sex with a married woman. And I know that it's difficult for people to get their head around that, but that's the reality. We often quote the scripture, but many times it's quoted out of context. My thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. But if we read the verses before, we find that God is referring to his forgiveness. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the evil man his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will freely pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Absolutely. I know that I have struggled with this concept of forgiveness in the past, but individual true repentance requires forgiveness on our part. Part of God's justice is to forgive because of the blood of Jesus. God's forgiveness is actually his justice in action. There's no justice if there's no forgiveness in our deeply repentant sins. Absolutely. But also absolutely irrelevant to the conversation at hand. Nobody that I've seen is making the argument that somehow Dr. Brown should not be forgiven, or that he should not be restored in his walk. And if they did, I would disagree with that. That's not really what's going on. What's going on here is he wants to get back to work. That's what this entire accountability report was all about. It was all about the punchline. We find no reason for him to spend another second on the sidelines. Get him back into the charismaniacal machine. Nancy continues, I cannot fully express how painful to me the events of 23 years ago were, and I'm sure they were. And now we have to watch Mike rehash and articulate sins of the past that had been fully repented of and put under the blood decades ago has been absolutely gut-wrenching and worse than what I had to endure 23 years ago. I mean, I'll take her in a word, but, again, the notion that he's fully repented of it, it's strange because his victims don't seem to believe that. They have a different opinion. I know everybody in this, on the charismania side, seems to think the only person's opinion who matters is Dr. Brown. The accountability team was flabbergasted that the Firefly report didn't ask Dr. Brown for his opinion. He is the accused. The bottom line is they took all the testimony from the victims, and they determined that it was credible. It's funny because the accountability team had no problem saying, solely based upon the testimony of Dr. Brown and Nancy, that they believe their story. To heck with the victims. He has become a sinner all over again. No, he hasn't. And has been forced to carry the weight and burden of sin that has been forgiven and removed by God himself. No. Does it sound to you like the victims have led just perfect lives since this happened, or did it seriously damage who they were? And we have no concern about that whatsoever. Once again, forget the sheep. They don't matter. Others have been publicly uprooted, scrutinized, and dissect all this before the masses. There's nothing I believe God is behind or asks us to do, let alone in front of the entire world. Well, you're wrong. Because you see what matters, Mrs. Brown, is that Dr. Brown has a public-facing ministry that serves countless hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, he's got a pretty large, aperture. What matters is what those people are going to hear and see and be taught. That's what matters, not your husband. He had a chance. He had the privilege of 40 years of ministry. But in the middle of it, he has this 1.5 year period of time where he committed 2 very, very wrong sins. And he admits that they were wrong, although he doesn't admit exactly what happened. But he didn't do anything about them. He just tried to brush them under the rug. I know you don't want to hear that. I understand. But that's what he tried to do. So is God behind the truth? God is always behind the truth. And when your ministry is in front of the entire world, when your catch line is, I'm the voice of moral clarity, maybe you should be clear. Some of you will undoubtedly understand the sorrow, the humiliation, the feelings of betrayal, and the shame I personally experienced. I feel absolutely horrible that she is put in this position to have to basically, make public atonement for what her husband did. And it was in the context that Mike very reluctantly agreed to keep things between one close friend of Fire and the other couple and ourselves in order for Mike to honor and protect me from even more pain, and because of the one and only covenant that God instituted amongst children, which is marriage. Mike consented to keep things from between the five of us, even though he expressed desire to shout it out to the world. I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I don't believe that. He did not want to shout this out to the world. And I might add, again, don't get me wrong, I'm sure he wanted to keep things private for your sake. No, I'm not saying that. Just like I'm sure the husband wanted to keep things private for their sake. But we need to stop pretending that these were four people who were equally matched, and that they were all just like four congregants in a church, and one wife and one husband had sinned against their people and their spouses, and then they came together and they agreed, hey, we forgive each other, but let's not tell anybody because it's embarrassing. I get that. That's not what happened here. Okay, I know that it's presented like, well, these were just friends of ours. No, they were sheep of his. He was in the position of spiritual authority, and people need to stop pretending that doesn't matter. Even more importantly, we also left the final decision of what was revealed in the hands of the husband. How he proceeded was left in his lap entirely, and it was his ultimate choice to keep things between us. Neither Mike nor myself dictated anything. This fact is extremely important because he is accused of hiding sin and being deceptive by not telling others of the situation decades later. Well, it's because he did. It's a little too convenient, again, to hide under the shadow of Matthew 18 when it does not apply to spiritual clergy abuse. It cannot apply. Those verses are, again, peers within the congregation. So the person in authority out of the four of you was Mike, and his job was to come forth. Once again, he did not have to mention the names of the other people involved. So they still could have been spared from the public humiliation, although you would not have been. And I get why he would want to do it. But now it's just like the Bible says, what we hide in the darkness, God brings into light. And now this is in the light. And it's time to own up to it and stop pretending that like everything back then was just hunky-dory. And, now there's all these mean people who are coming out now and litigating things in social media. Social media is how we do business now. It just is in the world. So, it's disingenuous to like basically smear it and say, somehow it's beneath us. And the years that Mike endeavored to do his best to keep that word and not bring additional shame on the other individual by revealing detail. So I want to read that again. And through the years, Mike endeavored to do his best to keep that word about keeping things private and not bring additional shame on the other individual by revealing details that would have certainly painted them in a bad light. So let me see if I got this right. In your mind, you think that Mike should get credit for hiding the truth because he was doing it to protect the woman he was having phone sex with. That he couldn't come out himself and just say, I as a leader failed. And maybe because of all the very real things that you're talking about, the loss of the house, the loss of the ministry, the split of the church. I get all that. It would have been perfectly understandable for him to come out and say, wow, I've been going through a lot and I've made two really bad, stupid mistakes. And I want to be honest and forthright about it. He doesn't have to mention who the person is. So stop pretending that he does. He doesn't get credit because he's hidden it for 20 years. The four of us met and there was repentance as well as heartfelt forgiveness all around. We even met on several other occasions for a meal, and there were even a request by the couple to consider a renewal of our former friendship. This we declined as we felt it was unwise. It's the first I'm hearing of this. Maybe the husband can shed some light on it. And that was the end of that for the next 22 years until 2024. As far as the other very damning accusations and the ugliness of what has been portrayed and the picture has been painted on social media, and now, in addition, the unsubstantiated claims in the Firefly, but they're not unsubstantiated. Nancy. Just to be clear, they are completely 100% substantiated by the victims of your husband and by other witnesses who witnessed the events. So stop pretending that this is all somehow a slander. I can also say that so many of the accusations and accounts are categorically untrue. You actually don't know that. That's your opinion. I respect that. Yet the publishing of them has succeeded in conveying a completely false narrative. Completely. There has been a relentless pursuit and orchestration to smear and then not only rewrite history, but create new history. So again, what she says, which has no basis in the truth, resulting in innocent things of the past, innocent, being presented, being weaved together to make them only appear sinister, unseemly, and diabolical, but also believable. Just to be clear, I feel horrible that Nancy's put in this position, but she is now calling the two victims liars. That's what this is saying. That people are rewriting history, creating new history. Nobody commenting on it can create new history. We weren't there. But you're saying it has no basis in truth or fact. You refer to the things that your husband did as the innocent things of the past. Phone sex with another woman, another man's wife, telling her to not have sex with her husband, trying to meet with her twice, the 19-year-old smacking her on the butt, kissing her on the lips, none of it. Leaving the note with the fantasies about the married woman for her to find. All of it is just innocent things of the past. All right. I have my own observations as to why truth and facts have been so twisted, but there is no benefit in stating these things, as all it does is add to the swirl. I don't know what that means. And although Mike's interaction with Sarah was certainly foolish and irresponsible, his intentions were completely innocent, absolutely no malintent. He viewed her as a father to a daughter. Unfortunately, he has been made to look diabolical, deviant, and predator, nothing be further from truth. That is not Mike Brown. I hate to break it to you. That's who he was. For this year and a half, where apparently everything was crazy in his life, that's what he was. Talk to Sarah. You guys knew her. Is she lying? Because you're calling her a liar. Foolish and irresponsible. That's all it was. And again, basically to reiterate the exact same BS talking point that Brown has been using. This is just a father and she's like a daughter to me. By the way, he used the same nonsense back then and was called out on it by multiple people. Go listen to the voicemails from, I can't remember the person's name, but basically left them voicemails telling them, like, listen, if this was my daughter, I would have laid you out. You need to stop lying. That's not who he was or not who he is, and although he's eager to admit his fault and take responsibility, no, he's not. And ask forgiveness without justification or explanation. I cannot sit idly by while he takes hits for things that never transpired for the way his character is portrayed. Never transpired. That means, according to Nancy Brown, Sarah is a liar, and the husband of the woman who's passed away is a liar. Do you ever notice that everybody else must be lying? Everybody else must be lying. Only Dr. Michael Brown has the fortunate position of being pure. Just for the record, although it's been stated Mike never apologized for this, that is simply not true. I was present when he did. The relationship between us continued unchanged when Sarah left ministry for Texas. Once again, calling Sarah a liar. She has said flat out, he never apologized for it. The bogus Matthew 18 meeting was not even about her. It was about the married woman. Sarah left a beautiful, heartfelt note on Mike's desk, which we still have. In the next 13 years, continue to initiate correspondence through email, sharing family updates, prayer requests, general news. Listen. Unfortunately, a lot of victims, still maintain relationship. You know what I'm saying? He was a spiritual authority to her. Sadly, because of the online firestorm of accusations, my family's been impacted in ways unimaginable. No daughter should have to hear her father go over the details of ugly sins from decades ago. Yeah, the best way to not do that is to probably not, have phone sex with a married woman and, try to groom a 19-year-old. Just saying. And she goes, sins that were fully repented of, again, not according to other people, under the blood forgiven by God. That does not mean they didn't happen. God might forgive. God always forgives if we truly seek repentance, but God forgives eternally. But there are consequences still in the natural, which I'm sure Dr. Brown would tell you is true. And now my children and grandchildren are forced to decipher fact from fiction and decide whether or not their father-grandfather is a sexual predator, abuser, and deviant groomer. The accounts and accusations are 100% fiction. Let's be clear. The Firefly Report says there's been nothing since 2002. So I think it would be unfair to say that he is a sexual predator, groomer, or a deviant. But for that year and a half, he was. I'm sure it was a tremendously burdensome time for him. The way that you describe it, I don't discount any of that. And that leads us all to make very bad, poor decisions. What it does not or should not do if we're in leadership is lead us to cover it up. Because there are those who have decided this should be litigated on social media. Again, social media is just simply the vehicle of today. So, Dr. Brown's entire ministry is on social media. They have attempted to ruin Mike's reputation. Hey, I'm not the one who had the inappropriate relationship with Sarah. I'm not the one with the emotional soul tie with the married woman I was having phone sex with. That wasn't me. Publicly judged his character and motives only based upon the direct testimony of the people involved. Shouted from the rooftop so many outright lies that they will be difficult, if not impossible, to dispel. All this without actually knowing the facts or even making a genuine attempt to get the truth. I've made genuine attempts to get the truth. I've digested every single part of this story directly from the mouths of the people who are involved. They simply believe what they have heard and read. Yeah, that's kind of what we do in life, right? I mean, I make no illusions. I was not in Brownsville in 2002. Add to the fact the damage was done to those in my family who are completely innocent. It is honestly a burden of unbearable weight. Again, for the 100th time. It's horrible that she was put in this position, but she chose to make a public statement that is going to be added to the public record to get her husband back into public ministry. So it has to be responded to. There's so much more I could say, but simply end the statement by expressing my fervent hope that God's truth will come to light. The Lord would somehow sort all this out on behalf of his people for the sake of genuine justice. Well, I guess we can finish on a note of agreement. Listen, this is just the first. This is the second salvo. The first salvo was the ridiculous accountability report, which check that video out from yesterday. Now his wife has come out. By the way, soon I expect there'll be a Dr. Brown statement that will basically push all the right buttons and say all the contrite things, and at the same time essentially deny the heart of the matter, and then basically be thankful to everybody for insisting that he get back into ministry, and boom, he'll be back in. Charisma News is going to unleash the hounds, and all you're going to hear is clamoring for Dr. Brown to return. So in the interim, who speaks for the dead wife except her husband? Who speaks for Sarah except for Sarah? And for the people who were there at the time. And Nancy was one of them. But the other people who were there at the time and have all borne witness about what has happened. So what you have is two victims whose stories are radically different from what Dr. Brown says. But remember, the core of it is they're in agreement, right? Dr. Brown admits that there was something wrong with what he was doing with both of these women. He just doesn't want to go as far as to basically tell the truth and admit that he was sexually abusive and he was manipulative and he was, whether he was, intentionally, consciously or unconsciously grooming Sarah, it doesn't really matter to me. Don't hand me the "she was my daughter" nonsense, because the witnesses at the time say that he did not pat his actual daughter on the butt. Come on, we're all adults here. Just, and this is the sad thing, again, is this could have been dealt with 25 years ago. And who knows, maybe he would have been able to build the exact same ministry empire. And then if anybody dared to come out and accuse him, he can go back and say, I brought this to everybody's attention back then and admitted my mistakes and was able to still build my ministry. And, yeah, and I'll be honest, I wouldn't be saying a word, not a word. You know, that's not what happened. The only people that benefit from Dr. Brown's version of the story is Dr. Brown and Nancy and the charismatical industrial complex. For what reason would these two people who looked up to Dr. Brown, considered him a spiritual father and role model, why in the world would they be making all this up? Why are they conspiring together too? Did they get together and get their notes right, and then they went and got all the witnesses from way back when? Ron Cantor is suddenly not trustworthy. The guy who released the voicemails. I wish I could remember his name. He's not trustworthy. Who worked directly with Dr. Brown for years, decades. Everybody's untrustworthy. Everybody's lying. Where there's this much smoke, something is on fire. And not fire ministry. Thanks for stopping by. Test everything and hold fast.